So our next step, now that our dig out and our sharp object check has been completed, we're going to lay in our pond underlayment. As you can see, it's kind of like a felt fabric, makes for a really nice cushioning layer between the soil and the rubber liner. And in some cases where you have a really rocky dig out and you're afraid of sharp objects still puncturing your liner, sometimes you can double up on this. There are, in some cases, if you have an extremely rocky dig out that's 90% rock and 10% soil, in place of this underlayment fabric, there's also another item on the market called concrete cloth, which is even thicker than this. It's almost about 10 to 20 times thick as this, and really provides extra padding beneath the rubber layer. So how would you measure how much underlayment you need for a particular size pond? Well, we purchased this underlayment in rolls. Most of the time you should get at least the same amount of square footage that you get for your actual pond liner, if not maybe 50 to 100% more than the square footage, depending on the consistency of your dig out. Like I said, the rockier the soil, the more sharp objects, the more underlayment padding you're going to want, or possibly concrete cloth. I usually cut this stuff in strips because it doesn't necessarily have to be a one size fits all. You can cut this and lay it in multiple strips really and overlap each one of them. Obviously it's a little different from the liner because the liner is one liner. You can't just piece a bunch of them together without, you know, getting into seaming, which is practically like welding liners together, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother situation. So now that we have our underlayment in the pond, now it comes time to put our liner in. But before I do that, maybe I should explain how I came to size the particular liner that we're using for this pond. In this case, we have approximately a 6 foot by 5.5 foot pond. It's an off size for what we normally do. A lot of pond kits out there are designed for 8 by 11s, 11 by 16s, but in some cases, smaller backyards call for smaller sizes or just custom sizes for that matter. So, knowing that we have a 6 foot long, 5.5 foot wide that goes 2 feet deep, how we would size our liner is we would have to consider this direction will be 6 feet plus our 2 foot depth here and our 2 foot depth here. So if we multiply that 2 foot depth by 2, that gives us 4 feet that we would add on to our 6 foot going this way. We then would add the same 4 feet to our 5.5 foot width. That would give us approximately 10.5 feet, or 9.5, I'm sorry. I always like to size for a little extra, so given our 2 foot depth and our 6 foot length and 5.5 foot width, that would give us a liner sizing of approximately 9.5 by 10 feet. I always like to go a little extra. I have found in the past that when it comes time to actually set the liner in and start rocking in, a lot of times that liner likes to come in on you and doesn't always like to stretch out. So I like a little extra to work with, so I typically would add 2 foot to that. So right now we're also working with a long stream and waterfall that's going to be entering into here. I have a separate waterfall liner that we're going to use, which will end up getting draped over into our pond liner here. In some cases, with even smaller ponds that don't have such large waterfalls entering in, you potentially could use one oversized liner to compensate for having a waterfall as well. The liner that we're using for this today is actually 12 feet by 13 feet. So our 12 foot direction will go this way, and our 13 foot direction of the liner will go this way. That'll allow for us to have a little extra height coming up into our waterfalls here and allow for our waterfall liner to drape over that pond liner. That way we won't have any water loss because the pond liner sits up so tall. For example, if we were building an 8x11 pond that goes 2 feet deep, we would need to take that 2-foot depth number, multiply it by 2, since we have 2 walls to the pond. So that would give us the number 4. We would add 4 to the 8x11 number, which would then give us a 12x16 number. I like to even overcompensate a little extra, since the liner likes to pull in on us a little bit here and there when we go to actually rock in the pond. I would even add about another 3 feet to that number, because it'll give us an extra 1.5 feet of play to work with on the outer edge of the pond. In that case, instead of having a 12x16 liner, I would maybe go 15x20 would be a safe bet to work with. Always better to have more liner than to have less and need more. I've already folded this liner in such a way that when I go to unfold it, it will unfold in the direction that I need it to be. Just like that, as I unfold it, it unfolds just about exactly where we need it to be. Sometimes I'll do the little bunny hop just to stretch a little more in the direction that I need it to go. Then it's just a matter of simply pulling out all your folds and stretching it to conform to the shape you've dug. I normally like to put a nice row of rock and boulders to pick from right on the edge of the pond. Typically one person would pass the boulders to another person who is inside the pond stacking it. So as you can see, we're not exactly always working with the flattest stone. Natural stone always tends to have different curves in it, and it makes it hard to stack sometimes. So as you've seen, I've been using gravel to help stabilize some of those spots that when you just set a rock down and it just doesn't sit right and it wobbles around too much, we stabilize it with some gravel. But really the best thing is a nice stable wall in a pond. You can see I'm putting some weight on each one of these stones and not a single one of them is rocking. If we were to have all these stones, you know, just placed randomly and not really stabilized, it makes for an unsafe environment when you go to actually clean or service this pond, or even just to stand around and maybe even put your foot on the edge. So stability and strength in a wall is key and important.